Let's stay with American elections now, and despite some uneasy interactions over trade deals not so long ago, South Africa and the US now enjoy a positive diplomatic relationship. And government hopes this will continue, whatever the outcome of today's US elections. Let's speak to Chelsea Markowitz, a visiting research fellow at the South African Institute of International Affairs, about this. Chelsea, good evening to you. Thanks a lot for your time. The US is one of our biggest trading partners. Are we to assume this relationship will continue regardless of whether Trump or Clinton comes in?
Well, I think if we look at the current agreement that's governing relations, so this is AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, this isn't set to expire until 2025. So I really highly doubt that either of the candidates is going to do anything to threaten this relationship, because I think that in all honesty, the value of African trade to the U.S. is much less than U.S. trade to Africa. However, I think what is important is the prospects of negotiating a future free trade agreement after AGOA expires. And that's where I think that both the candidates might have different approaches. I think that with Trump, it might be a bit more difficult to start negotiating a new trade agreement, which would need to happen now, because he did say he would take a real hard line to any sorts of negotiations, and South Africa might not be able to push some of its important policy objectives through in a free trade agreement.
The interesting thing about AGOA, which I also mentioned yesterday, is the fact that despite the fact that it has been concluded and you know it is a long-lasting trade agreement, the reality is it can be reviewed at any time that the United States desires to do so. Now, how difficult if say Trump came into power, for example, and he wanted to change the nature of that trade agreement or review it, how difficult would it be for him to actually get that through the US Congress?
Well, I think that it wouldn't be too difficult, to be honest, because you've seen a lot of countries reviewed in Obama's presidency even. So I think if there are issues like with Swaziland, there were governance issues from the U.S. perspectives, there were the chicken wars. So there is possibility for it to be under review. In both candidates, I think that there is this possibility, it's true.
I do want to ask you about the possibility of Donald Trump coming in and the many statements that he has made that have caused offense. I mean, he's been called a racist, a bigot, he's been called sexist, and there are several other labels he's been given. But clearly, some of his values are simply not aligned with the values of our Constitution. How easy will it be for us to do business with a country possibly going to be headed by a man who is so different from us in terms of our outlook?
Well, I honestly think, as I've said before, that Trump is a lot of talk, and I think a lot of the offensive things that he said, he's going to have to soften once he gets into office, if he's going to be respected. But I think you're right that it's going to create a lot of uncertainty in terms of his diplomatic relations with leaders throughout the world, because people really don't know what to expect of him. I do think he's going to tone it down, but I think there will be some initial uncertainty. And I think what you'll also see is this affecting global markets as well, as people are really uncertain what to expect. And in reality, it is anybody's guess.
You know, people are looking at this election and saying from a South African point of view, it would be certainly far more beneficial for us if Hillary Clinton came in. Do you feel that there will be more benefit to us from a Hillary Clinton presidency?
In my personal perspective, yes, because what I've said about AGOA, I think she'll be more flexible in negotiating a post-AGOA trade agreement. Also, in terms of aid, I think her tenure as Secretary of State, also with the Clinton Foundation, she's had relationships with African leaders and had significant experiences with aid on the continent. So I think we will see more of that with her as well. There are some comments about people thinking that Hillary's going to start a World War III, but I really don't think that there's any weight to that. So I think that it would be better for the continent and South Africa.
Well, South Africans are wondering, ordinary South Africans are wondering, these are all very highfalutin conversations about global politics that we're having, but how could the ordinary South African, the average South African's everyday life be affected by this election?
Well, I think in honesty, there's not so much that I think the everyday lives could be affected. If we look at, though, things like global terrorism, this is an issue that's affecting all corners of the globe. It hasn't affected South Africa yet, but it's affected all the other parts of the African continent. So this is definitely a real issue that America has big involvement with in terms of its global place. So I think that the way that either candidate would deal with this could potentially have an effect. And then if we do look at AGOA, for example, it creates 60,000 jobs in the country. So the way that the candidate does deal with trade would affect these jobs as well.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Chelsea Markowitz from the South African Institute of International Affairs.